Hello, Garland Nixon here, back with Yawen. She's a radio personality from CGT in radio in Beijing, and we're going to get her perspectives on the recent 90-day tariff agreement on between the U.S. and China. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here once again with Yawen Ju. Hopefully, we can have her as a regular guest weekly here, so we can get her perspectives from Beijing. Certainly, we hear everything from the mainstream media in the United States and in Europe, and those of us who follow the Russian media, RT and Sputnik and Izvestia, etc. We get the Russian perspectives normally, but most Americans either don't have access or don't take the opportunity to read the Global Times, Jinhao, CGT, and etc. So, fortunately for us, we have Yawen Zhu. Thank you very much, Yawen, for coming back.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Garland.
Let's start here. We had this, people are calling it a trade deal, but we have to keep in mind it is a 90-day agreement. It's not permanent. It certainly implies that there will be some level of permanence agreed in that day, but we don't know anything for sure. So let's start here. Are you familiar with the agreement, and can you give us some of the details?
Of course. Well, actually, before we delve deeper into the details of the joint statement, I want to firstly point out, this wave of tariffs tensions between U.S. and the world was initiated by America. So when the new administration took office, it adopted this distorted and misguided understanding of China-U.S. economic and trade relations. And so based on from that flawed view, it pushed forward a series of tariffs policies nowadays seems observed, like believing that through this one-sided tariff pressure, the U.S. could force China and also the rest of the world to make unrealistic concessions. So, like for many Chinese analysts, it was like trying to fix America's domestic issues, maybe inflation, job employment rates and stuff like that, by making other countries to take the medicine. That's how we see it. So now let's see like the joint statement. We can see that it says if emphasis to sustainable, mutually beneficial. I think that's not only essential for China and U.S., but also for the global economic stability. But it's kind of take hard way for the U.S., through the round of friction between China and U.S., for the U.S. to recognize what's really going on the ground. So now let's look at the details. So we know on April 2nd, the U.S. Launched this tariffs against the Chinese goods about 34%. And then on April 8th and 9th, the White House issued this executive orders. It raised the tariffs to 50% and eventually to 125%. That's not adding up to the previous 20%. That's pretty much cutting off normal trades between China and US. So in response to that, China launched this 3 rounds of countermeasures to impose tariffs on US goods to 125%. And now, under the new agreement between China and US in Geneva, so the US has agreed to cancel 91% of the additional tariffs it imposed since April and suspended the 24% tariffs hike for 90 days, as you also mentioned at the beginning of the show. And then China has responded in a similar way. It canceled 91% of its own counter tariffs and suspending the same 24% tariffs on US goods. So both sides are also maintaining the 10% as leverage, because we know after 90 days, they're even during this period and after, they're going to definitely have more negotiations going on, since the two sides have established this trade negotiation mechanism. So from China's side, I've been watching, reading articles and watching videos. So from China's side, is a big victory, because we kind of didn't expect these tariffs could be cut off by such a quick time. We thought the U.S. might stand longer than that. But anyway, this is a good news for both China and U.S. After this process of interaction and negotiation, especially after the U.S. Started feeling real pressure from its citizens, from the U.S. businessmen and investors, the stock market, all of that. I'm glad that the U.S. government has realized that its actions were backfiring, and because of the domestic pressure, it forced the U.S. government to come to the terms with the reality that it cannot continue to act unilaterally or coercively. It must return to the fundamental of economics and approach China rationally, and also seek practical solutions and common ground. And for China, it has clearly shown that the country has both the determination and tools to effectively respond to any form of tariffs imposed by the U.S. side. And another thing I want to point out is that first, from the joint statement, so first, both sides have effectively reached this tariffs truce, so preventing the worst case scenario, which is a good news, right? And we know from in the process, the U.S. was the aggressor, pushing China to defend itself and fight back. And now both sides have returned to this relatively calm and balanced state. But we have still to be cautious about where things go from here, whether tensions escalate again or continue to ease. We don't know. We have to wait and see. And the other thing is that so over the past month or so, we have come to better understand this pattern. This pattern, implemented by the U.S. Like, we have to, every time the U.S. impose the tariffs, we have to ask the question: what exactly is the American government trying to do? Like, how should either China and the rest of the world respond strategically? And then the answer is becoming clear. So without firm and reciprocal countermeasures, it's very difficult to bring the U.S. side back to the rational negotiation, back to the negotiation table. And then, so we can see that over the past month, China has taken multiple actions to push back, and as a result, the U.S. has changed its stance, even though it's temporarily. But at least we have seen like the America is becoming more pragmatic, like as a pragmatic negotiator. But as I said earlier, it doesn't guarantee for the long term, result. We still have to, see how the by the end of the day is how the negotiation goes. And then since the trade consultation mechanism has been established, what's next is about implementation. So we have to watch closely to see when and how President Donald Trump signs this executive that to really put the tariff suspensions and cancellation reduction into effect, as it was mentioned in the memorandum. And then from China's side, I think we have to judge by actions but not by words to evaluate the real impact on bilateral trade. And so the bigger question here is what we have learned from this month-long round of friction. Even if tariffs for now are easing, but we must be prepared for more. So from China's side, I think also it could be a good example for other countries in the world. Like, you need to develop this long-term strategy for dealing with this unpredictability of the U.S. Trade policy. So we have to still, be cautious about what's going to happen. And the latest from the WTO Director General, she said that this success of the high-level China-U.S. trade talks represents a significant move forward, especially in today's climate of global uncertainty. And she hopes that this progress is, well, not only, make China and U.S. move forward, but also for the rest of the world, especially for those vulnerable economies. So we're really hoping to see that China and the U.S. to build on this foundation, to find workable solutions, to ease tensions, and to restore trust, which has been damaging a lot, and then eventually to strengthen confidence in this multipolar trading system. Yeah, so that's pretty much my observation.
Now, I did want to ask you this because some of my viewers had sent a question, and they had said, the last time we talked about the big event, the World War II 80-year commemoration. Certainly, we talked about the great sacrifices and the great battles that China was involved in and their contribution to the victory. And what we saw here last week were two of the most powerful leaders, two of probably the three most powerful leaders on earth, President Xi and President Xi and Putin meeting together, but they didn't just meet. And I think this is why it's important. They met, yes, and they celebrated this anniversary, but additionally, apparently there was a lot of meetings, there were deals signed, and I think that is very important. Do you have any thoughts on the importance and the event that happened with the President Xi and Putin meeting in Moscow, signing deals? Also, mind I add this, there were many leaders from around the world there that came together. It also showed that, contrary to some Western attempts, neither Russia nor China has been isolated. They were actually very much welcomed and celebrated by the world. Your thoughts on these two leaders meeting in Moscow?
Yeah. Actually, I joined you last time to discuss President Xi's visit to Russia to participate this the 80 days, the victory day of Russia's, the 80 days of the victory in the World Anti-Fascist War in Moscow. So I think China and Russia, as I stated in the last episode, they are very important player in today's world. From this, we're neighbors, very important neighbors, and the principle of the two countries' bilateral ties is non-confrontation and does not non-alliance and does not target any third party. So that's from a Western view that actually is not China's intention nor is Russia's intention, but because of the I'll say the threat from the Western world, that's kind of from the outside pushing China and Russia together. But from China's side, Russia is a very good neighbor, and we are like two countries are in a bilateral relations with no limits, and from trade, economic investment, and like agriculture, energy, people-to-people exchanges, we're very close, loyal, in a very close and loyal bilateral relationship. So it doesn't mean China and Russia's stable relationship does not mean it's a threat to the West, but in contrast, is the stable pillar for the region and also for the world. Consider their economic size, their population, their contribution to a lot of like critical factors in today's world. So I think President Xi's visit to Russia, as you said, the two sides, they have signed a lot of bilateral agreements and over 20 cooperation agreements across multiple sectors have been signed. So the visit will only underscore this very mutual trust and strong momentum in China-Russia relations, which will definitely opening a new chapter for the two countries, to promote a more just and multipolar world order. So Yeah, that's
I,
how we. Yeah, please go ahead.
I'll also add this. I think it was important that to see that some of the leaders, such as President Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela, and of course the celebrated young leader Ibrahim Traore from Burkina Faso, were there. These are people who
Mm.
are, in some instances, under siege by Western powers, and that they were there in acceptance and support of these two leaders. And I think it showed that China and Russia are viewed as responsible in the global south. In some of the in the developing countries, I think Russia and China are viewed as partners, economic partners, by the global south countries that traditionally have been, under assault by some of the colonial powers. So I was happy to see the leaders of Russia and China there with, again, leaders such as President Lula, President Maduro, and certainly Commander Ibrahim Traore. I think that was, and particularly as a person who studies, the Africans, and I'm very proud of President Traore and the things that he's doing in Burkina Faso. There's a lot of great celebration amongst the African and Pan-African diaspora about what he's doing. Let's get back to this. The tariffs against China, I think, they were aimed at China, and they were aimed at weakening China. And I would argue the United States was taught a lesson they needed to be taught. They needed to learn that China is a very powerful country and they can't push China around. But this was also a tariff war on the entire world. Your thoughts on this? How you view this U.S. tariff war, which was on China, but it was also on allies and developing countries, and countries that they thought were friendly. Japan, some countries that you could argue were, some would use the word vassals of the United States, controlled by the United States. But this tariff war on China and the entire world, what is your view on it?
Yeah, that's actually very surprising to many of the U.S. allies that they didn't expect that they like European Union, like Canada, like Mexico, Japan, South Korea, all of those countries, they're traditional allies of America, but they were also imposed tariffs. Like at different levels, and they are trying to negotiate with the U.S. However, seems like they do not have the ball. Some of them do not have the ball to stand up against to the tariff bowlings, and we know U.S. Is very powerful in a lot of sectors. However, it's not only hurting its own economies, it's also hurting its allies and also hurting the developing countries, like many countries in Africa and also in Southeast Asia are also suffering from the tariffs. Like Cambodia suffered the highest, I think it's 49%, correct me if I'm wrong. And the US is also imposing like as high as like 3,000 some percent tariffs on solar panels, on goods uh, produced in Cambodia, Malaysia, and Vietnam. So those are very bad examples, which will not only undermine, the global efforts to fight for climate change, to transform from traditional energy to, a green energy, but also is hurting the supply chain of the global economy, also including the U.S. domestic market. So if like some were saying that is like this is a strategic miscalculation on the U.S. side. So it's so far we frame it as a protectionism, but I think it's more than that. It's like this deeping, but very deep economic problems within the domestic in America, and then the U.S. government is trying to fix, but it just took the wrong measure to handle its own domestic issues. Like we have noticed that like there high inflation, there's job opportunity problem, and also inequality going on. But imposing tariffs is not like a cure all measure for all of those issues. Um, not only that, it has kind of pushed the "You're in America" garland. Have you noticed like the increase of the daily spending, the food, the groceries, and like toys? All that went up, and even flowers. I watched the news like during Mother's Day, people are purchasing this paper cut flowers instead of real flower because a large number of the flowers are imported from other countries to America, but because of the tax tariffs, it just the price went skyrocketing high. So that's just a very small example to demonstrate how the tariffs is not only hurting U.S. allies, hurting China, hurting other developing countries, but also hurting America economy. So when like I saw the number here, like the Goldman Sachs estimates that the tariffs U.S. imposed like on the world, it will push U.S. inflation up by 1.5 percentage points. And then the Peterson Institute says that additional cost per like the tariffs will push the additional cost per household at around $3,000 to $5,000 a year. So that could be a very heavy burden for low-income families who spend more of their incomes on essentials like food, like everyday necessities, and where prices are rising faster than wages. But it's very ironic is that we hear the U.S. government were saying that they hope to have the tariffs. They hope to raise the tariffs so that they can get the revenue to pay the debt crisis. Right. But when the tariffs income hits like $270 billion in 2025, it's barely a drop in the bucket compared to the $36 trillion in national debt for America. So, and at the same time, the inflation is forcing the Federal Reserve to keep interest rate high, making borrowing more expensive for businesses and damping investment, and also ultimately while slowing down the domestic economic growth. And another thing is that when we hear about the President Donald Trump's government, he was saying that, okay, we're imposing tariffs because we want to bring manufacturing back to America. But the thing is, we have seen the exact opposite. Like the U.S. The car manufacturing Stellantis, right? Stellantis.
Yes,
Yeah,
Stellantis.
this
Yes,
is
that's
one
it.
of U.S. biggest Stellantis, thank you.
Yeah.
Stellantis. So they had to lay off 900 employees last month because and also shut down some plants because of the high increase of supply chain costs. And other industries that heavily rely on Chinese components like electronics and machinery, they also face the similar risks of production halts. And we don't even need to mention those small businesses, like they have to pass down the costs on consumers, and eventually they have to shut down their operation because of the tariffs. So that's just some vivid example of what we have seen, the damage the tariffs have caused on consumers and businessmen. And also, if we look at the history, this very well-known tariffs like 1930 smooth Howard tariffs, it worsened the Great Depression. And also in 2002, former President George W. Bush, his steel tariffs were later, ruled illegal by the World Trade Organization. And then today, instead of reshoring, the U.S. companies are turning to nearshoring, like Tesla. We know Tesla is building factories in Mexico, not in America, because like what Elon Musk says, the higher labor costs and aging infrastructure at home. So I think, like in nutshell, the U.S. just isn't competitive for this large-scale industrial return. So it has to really focus on how to innovate instead of imposing tariffs, hurting domestic and global economy. It's just but I'm glad that they are return to the negotiation table, and this is a good starting. We will have to see, like, hopefully the U.S. will stick to its promise. because sometimes we can see U.S. government officials, they're very they often change. They promise one thing and then later on they flip over. So hopefully we will see this time they will stick to the agreement and follow through what they promised in the coming days.
Well, yeah. For the United States to say, well, 50 years ago, we had a strong industrial base. So we're just going to get another strong industrial base. Well, that's like me saying, well, I used to run 20-kilometer marathons and races. So I think I'll start running them again. But I don't take into account that I'm older, that I've had a knee operation, that things have
Mm,
changed, right? My body's
true.
not the same,
Yeah.
the environment's not the same, everything. The United States that had the industrial base in the 1950s had a strong, um, uh, in fact, at that time, fairly new electrical grid. Well, the electrical grid now is old and it hasn't been upgraded. The roads were much newer. They're not. The ports were much newer. We don't have the ports. So we don't have the foundation that we had at that time to support industry. So it seems to me that
Mm,
this plan to okay, we're going to reindustrialize and we're going to have all of this industry doesn't take into account the changes in the United States. And it doesn't take into account that any business that's going to do um, an industry or build a factory has to think, what are the labor costs? How much is it going to cost? How much do
mm,
I have to pay the people that work there? And I might add this. And the things that this factory would need to make something, almost all of them are going to come from China. So if we're
mm,
taking a bunch of things from China to use in our factory to build whatever we're going to build, it's always going to be cheaper to build it in China or Vietnam or somewhere closer to China because we have to bring the stuff from China to here to build it. So the bottom line
mm,
is, my point is, it wasn't well thought out. The plan to
mm.
reindustrialize the United States it was only thought out on a surface level. This is what I would like to do, but they didn't seem to go into a deep plan as to whether or not it's a
Mm.
reasonable plan. They just came up with a plan. But if I can sit here on YouTube and I can say, there's some problems with that plan, I would have thought that the people who were supposedly in control of this could have thought these things out, but apparently they didn't.
Yeah, and also, Garland, there's one thing I would like to add is that, by doing so, US is actually isolating itself from the rest of the world because the developing countries and other, including EU, US allies, Canada, and Australia, Mexico, they all want to trade, embrace the multipolar trading system instead of, only trade with America, even though it is still a big market of it, but they want to embrace have more trading partners. And by doing so, like now, US is forcing itself of like, you know, be alone. And in the meantime, it's kind of forcing China, like Canada, EU, ASEAN countries to come together, to use currencies other than dollar for trade. Then we know, like, I look at the number, the dollar's share in global payments has already dropped from 60% to 48% nowadays. So another thing is, look back, like during President Donald Trump's first term, he imposed this tariffs war on China as well. But look what happened. It cut out, US trying to cut China's out of this high-tech manufacturing sector, like chips, like semiconductor production, but it has only pushed China to, invest more and become more self-reliant. Like we know Huawei, it has introduced is like more than 800 million devices, this Harmony OS, the cell phone, with its own chips. And another very well-known Chinese tech company, SMIC, has also significantly increased its production of the 14 nanometer chips. That's all because of US, cutting its own suppliers to Chinese tech companies and pushing China to research, invest heavily on research and development to become more self-reliant. So I think that that's just a policy that backfires. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we've seen that before. We saw that with Russia. The United States put in 2014 started putting massive sanctions on Russia, and it caused Russia to begin to produce things internally and to find ways to be able to supply themselves with the things that they need. And when the United States increased and the West increased the sanctions on Russia, Russia was able to either easily weather the sanctions and to actually grow. And it seems to me the same thing with China. The US said, okay, we're going to tariff, or we're going to try to stop them from getting chips and things like that. It seems to me that the attempt to hold down another country, Russia, China, etc., pushes this country, incentivizes this country to say, we have to be independent. I also think the other thing that I think China has done is China has not only looked at the area of chips or cell phones, they've looked at other areas and said, the United States could try to stop us from doing something else that they haven't stopped yet. Because China does a lot of planning, a lot of central planning. And I believe that China is planning for the future in case the United States tries to inhibit them in other areas, that China becomes more and more self-sufficient. And that causes China to actually innovate and come up with new science and new technology that they wouldn't have come up with, and that even the West hasn't come up with yet. So in a way, in a paradoxical way, shall we say, it has benefited China greatly that the United States has tried to hold China back.
We have to thank the U.S. counterpart for doing so.
Yes.
Because if not because of the U.S., China probably are still in its comfortable zone, relying on the imports of other foreign countries. But because of U.S. is cutting China off and also asking its allies stop exporting those chips to the Chinese market, China have to do it. Like EV, for example, the new electric vehicle, and also solar panels. Those are all because of, and of course, there are multiple reasons contributed to nowadays China is leading the player in these two sectors. But still, I think because of U.S. I'll say isolation on certain areas on China, it cannot help China, realize it has to rely on its own if it doesn't want to be, its economy want to continue strive and achieve its goal in the future. Yeah.
The other thing is, I think that, and this is part of our discussion. So the United States was doing tariffs on China and the rest of the world. But meanwhile, as the U.S. says, well, China, we've got to tariff China and Vietnam, Cambodia, everyone else, it doesn't really address the U.S.'s internal problems. Rising inequality, inflation, unemployment, things of that nature. So the U.S. was kind of blaming China and going after other people, but we have very, very serious internal problems that the American people are concerned with. They feel like it is our government's responsibility to address these problems, not to blame them on China or Russia or Iran or whoever. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. As I actually briefly touched upon, the U.S. government should really investing its people, is their livelihoods, their basic like infrastructure, their medical care and education, and all of that help help the people have a better life. But in contrast, what we have seen of the U.S. government in the past few decades is launching war or proxy wars against the other countries that they were. So I think this is a very critical point. If U.S. still wants to, remaining the very powerful, influential power in today's world, it has to really do its own thing instead of blaming China, blaming Russia, blaming all other countries. Like it has to really invest in its people and build this mechanism or build this system to make sure its business, its people can flourish under its governance. If if we look at the data. Nowadays, there was a survey I think a couple years ago that was very famous. They asked the citizens around the world to evaluate like how satisfied they are with their government, China has the highest ranking, goes like 98%. Like the people who took the survey, 98% of the respondents were happy or satisfied with Chinese government's leadership. So I think I'm not sure. I don't remember how exact what was the number of coming out of the U.S. American citizens, but I think it won't be that high. Yeah.
No,
So I think
maybe 9.8%.
I think that's the issue. You want to, so we talk about this, like even though America is always saying, oh, we're a country fight for democracy, human rights, all of that, but how like if you break down what is democracy, it's like are people happy with the government's leadership? Can they afford to live in a house they want? Can they have a very happy, satisfied salary? Can they support a family? Can they have a very happy job? Like all of those things matters. But China has really doing a great job on doing that because it's really people-centered governance. Even though the West calls China like is under CPC's leadership, but still it has done great things. It has, lifted over 800 million people out of poverty, extreme poverty. It has done a revolutionary changes in education system. Nowadays, everyone has the free 9-year opportunity to go to schools, and like they can decide where they want to live, and so all of those, and also the aging, like the longevity rate of Chinese seniors are growing as well. So those are not everyone covers with the basic healthcare. So I think if you want to really make your country strong and influential into this world, you have to put your people as the priority, but not influencing other countries' internal affairs or trying to use those foreign policy to launch cover revolution and just to focus on your people. I think that's the best way out.
Um, something that I find interesting. I don't. Maybe you can give me your view from there, or I don't know the numbers as well. But apparently, the United States put this trade war on China with the expectation that they were going to have significant detrimental effects, negative effects on China's international trade. And China's international trade apparently, particularly their exports, rose by about 8% in April. What does that tell us
Yeah.
about China's basically trade with the world and their ability to weather the resilience? Certainly, I'm not going to say that a market the size of the United States leaving China's economic orbit is not going to cause some economic pain, but the fact that their exports actually rose. What do those numbers tell us?
That's a very good question, Garland. I'm glad you asked. As you mentioned, so China's April export number beats expectation, landed at 8.1%. So I think this strong export performance, actually, despite this ongoing trade tensions, is underpinned by a number of reasons and some long-term strategic planning. So first, we know China has developed this world-class connectivity and infrastructure, like say highways, railways, ports, airports. So actually, it was surprise to me as well when I look at the number. So 7 out of 10 largest container ports are located in China. And this level of connectivity and logistic ability is just is just leading the world, and even the US cannot match. And secondly, I think it's because China's manufacturing success has supported this highly skilled workers, and also this financial connectivity and this business friendly environment supported by the government has created this, I'll say, fundamental basis for the country to develop its economy. So it offers a very stable and a predictable setting for both domestic and foreign investors, which has been crucial for attracting global investors, global capitals, and also maintaining growth over the years. just the last month, there was a survey released by American Chamber of Commerce in China, and they found that despite tensions, nearly half of the U.S. businesses in China still pick China among their top 3 global investment destinations. So why? Because the vast consumer bases, this cutting edge manufacturing ecosystem, and also its growing capacity of research and development. So together, those make China very attractive and also a top bet for global investors. And we were talking about the domestic, right? Now, if we look at the bigger picture on a global level, China is the major trading partner with over 140 countries in the world. And China initiated this Belt and Road Initiative, and also the BRICS is part of the BRICS mechanism, and it has been promoting this South-South partnership between developing countries. So it has not only trying to develop its domestic economy, but also is trying to bring its experience and also promote the economic growth with its trading partners around the world. So under that background, I think it will be easier to understand why, even though U.S. kind of decoupling from China, but China still can remain this very robust export manufacturing in April. Um, and as we're talking today, like leaders and government officials from Latin America and the Caribbean nations, they're gathered in Beijing this week to attend the fourth China CLAC ministerial forum. So the two sides, they will deepen regional ties and also promote trade. And also this afternoon, actually tonight, President Xi Jinping and Brazilian President Lula, they held a bilateral meeting and released a joint statement as well. So in the meantime, the president of Colombia announced that his countries will formally join China's Belt and Road Initiative. So all of those message underscores like China's vision for a shared future. I think that's like US doesn't want to be friends with China. China can make more friends around the world. I think that could be a very crucial reason for the country to continue, remain economic export, robust, as I said, robust economic export performance with in April. Yeah. But we still need each other. I'm not saying China doesn't need US. We still need each other. And as both officials from the two countries said, we shouldn't be decoupling. Just we need to find a way to, make each other comfortable and continue our trade and development. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. I guess I've learned a lot, picked up a lot from you, but we've got, this is 90 days. We're hoping that this, becomes final and that it becomes, documented, and we can move forward with stable economic relationships between the two superpowers. What do you think? What do you see the future? What's next for U.S. China trade?
Well, so the future of China-U.S. trade relations, I think, remains uncertain at this level, but shows signs of, I would say, cautious optimism. So we need to be optimistic, but also we need to be cautious about it. So we know the recent joint statement paused the tariffs and tariffs war and kind of established this very important trade negotiation mechanism. That's a very positive step. However, I think the significant challenges remains, like including the need to address some structural issues in trade and investments among two countries. We still for China and US, we still need to continue engaging in constructive dialogue to find mutually beneficial solutions and common ground going ahead. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. We've been talking with Yawen Zhu. She's a radio personality and a very smart person from Beijing who graces us weekly, and we get to learn a lot. And I think it's important for us to have the dialogue between our countries like this. Where can people find you online if people want to see your work or follow you on whatever social media platforms or whatever the case?
Okay. Yeah, I'm on Twitter and also on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter by search Yawen Xu. 17, and the same for YouTube.
Thank you very much. Well, everybody, or everyone, I think this was great, and I appreciate everyone in the chat over there. I certainly saw a lot of conversations going on in the chat, so I know that you all were having your own conversations about these kinds of things, and that's important. Here's what I ask. Number one, follow me on Rockfin. Follow me on Rumble. That's very important. Follow me on Telegram, Facebook, that kind of stuff. Also, this is critical. Share this on all your social media platforms. Right now, we've had about 270 to 300 people watching right now. I think last week we got 8 to 10,000 views. So let's go for 15 to 20,000 views for the show this week. We'll keep increasing, and more people will learn about this. So here's what's important. Share this on all your social media platforms. That is something that you can do as a viewer to be a part of the new media, to be a part of alternative media, and to get around the blackout of honest information and honest dialogue that we have from the mainstream media. Of course, you see everything going by there. If you can contribute, that's great. Also, I now have my P.O. Box. Look right there, P.O. Box 32, Glen Burnie. Feel free to write me letters. Feel free to send anything you want. If you want to send a book, if you want to send a letter, if you want to send a donation, it doesn't matter. I have my P.O. Box. I've got a number of letters. I've been reading the letters that I'm getting from people, suggestions for future shows. So that's great. Thank you very much. Yawen Zhu, thank you, and look forward to talking to you again this week.
Thank
next
you for
week.
having me, guys.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.